Good morning. Here we are again. Turn my music down a little bit. So today I want to talk about a little bit more about change of perspective. Uh, I think that's more than anything what I'm trying to do with these is change perspective. Now I'm looking at present situations that we're dealing with, that I'm dealing with, and what we can possibly do to change our rate of, to change the way things are being done in our families. And how westernization may be interacting and impacting indigenous tribes. One of the issues I want to talk about in this is justice. When we talk about justice, uh, the justice system and what it means, what justice means to me, specifically what justice means to me in regards to my children's sexual abuse and my own history of sexual abuse. Uh, what does justice look like for me in both instances? Uh, I would say that justice is to be made whole. Justice is to receive repair. Justice is to receive maybe just payment. Uh, and I think primarily in there is to be made whole. Uh, and one way to look at it is an attempt to make a situation beneficial to the victim. In other words, if not beneficial, at least not damaging. Give a sense of closure to victims of trauma. Give a sense of purpose. Give a sense of meaning to instances. In other words, if I'm hit in the face, uh, what is justice for that? For me, uh, in asking me what does justice look like. Uh, and I would say something along the lines that I want the person who hit me to not hit me again, almost certainly, and I want something out of being hurt. And the question is what? Uh, what do I want out of my situation personally? What do I want from my history? What do I want from my perpetrators? Uh, and the justice system that I live in tells me that if the man that molested me or the people that traumatized me go to jail, uh, is taken to court and tried and convicted and punished, that's justice. Uh, and I don't think that's justice. Uh, One way that I started looking at it is what would I feel makes me feel like I'm whole, like there's been something done that, if not makes it worthwhile, that I was traumatized, uh, but at least makes it seem purposeful, answers the question, why God? Why did you do this? Why did you let this happen in this world? Uh, and sending someone to jail is not justice. Uh, I would say if you went to me and asked me about my kids, what's justice? I would say uh, westernization offers an outcome, a result, a consequence uh, to these crimes against my family. They say that justice is a consequence, uh, and that consequence is justice. But would Herbert going to jail and being punished bring me a sense of justice? Would it repair the damage done to my family? Would it ease my children's suffering? Would it have given my son a sense that life is worth living? Would it have alleviated his shame and his personal struggle? Uh, and furthermore, would it have improved things for my people? And I would argue that incarceration and punishment doesn't accomplish any of those things. Uh, that incarceration is just an outcome that I'm not terribly interested in. I'm getting myself some coffee, morning thing. Uh, so, what am I looking for in this situation? If I'm not looking for a consequence and I'm looking for results, what do I want out of it? Uh, what would give me a sense that what happened to my family has purpose, has a meaningful outcome? And for me, uh, top of that uh, is a sense that I want to understand their abuser more. I want to understand why and how it took place, not just what he did, but I want to know what he was thinking. I want to know what his purpose was, what his belief systems were. Uh, it's not just to understand him or me, and while it is personal to me, it's important for me to understand those things. Just for me personally, I think it's also important for my people to understand that and to look at what we could do. Hmm. No, if I don't want him to go to jail, and punishment isn't going to satisfy me, uh, then what is going to make it feel like my personal situation has purpose? And that's for me to change what happened, to take that opportunity to learn. I don't think that Herbert is a true absolute anomaly to our people. Not only does he has personal issues, those personal issues are interacting with our families and our people. And that understanding him will understand other people like him. Will understand why people do what they do. Will understand why addiction is prevalent with trauma. We'll see how addiction and maladaptive behaviors, and that's a fancy way of saying behaviors that don't serve people well. Addiction, violence, repeat incarcerations, promiscuity, blah de blah. Those things, maladaptive behavior patterns that really cause problems in life. That's what we call it in counseling. If we could understand those maladaptive uh, behavior patterns better, we could start to understand why people are doing it. What's the driver behind behaviors? And I think we need to understand that. And I think we've always, as a people, have worked to understand that in each other. I think the justice system as we know it, where I take someone like Herbert and cast him off into jail and leave him there and don't speak to him and hope that punishment suffices and that he comes out of it and he is a changed person, that he returns to our people after having sat in jail for X number of years as a person who is going to do good for our culture. I think that's an unreasonable expectation, and I think our people have always recognized that punitive behavior, negative reinforcement, they call it in counseling terms. Negative reinforcement doesn't work. Punitive behaviors don't work. Uh, if my son disobeys me and I don't know, uh, wakes, just goes out one day and jumps on my snow machine or gets in my car and drives out and runs over one of my other children, uh, that taking him and throwing him in jail and leaving him there and punishing him, uh, that's not exactly going to improve my family. It's not going to unrun over one of my children if he ran over my son uh, and broke his legs with my car. Throwing him in jail or taking the keys from him or beating him with the keys or running over him with the car or tying him behind the car and dragging him down the road or clubbing him on the head with a block of wood uh, or doing whatever is, first of all, it's not going to fix my car. It's not going to get the blood off of my car. It's not going to unrun over my other kid. It's not going to unbreak his legs. It's not going to make his broken legs heal any faster. It's not going to make them hurt any less. Uh, from his standpoint, if his brother did that deliberately, it's not going to make him feel better about his brother. It's not going to make him trust his brother more. If he ever sees his brother in the car again, he's going to be afraid of it. It's not going to teach the kid who stole the car to drive better. Uh, it's really going to accomplish nothing other than making one son be hurt and the other son believe that his brother being hurt is somehow or another good for him. And my family will be worse off if I embrace straight punishment, and especially if punishment is the only reaction that I really have. Uh, in reality, when family members make mistakes like that and do things like that, there's rarely ever an instance where straight punishment is the best answer. And that's just true, and we've always recognized that. And with indigenous cultures, we're always dealing with relatives. We're always dealing with tribal members. We're always dealing with cousins and uncles and brothers and sisters and friends of family. And that makes it a lot more like a family situation than a criminal situation. And I think our people have always recognized that. And I think that that view of each other, of people as people and not as behaviors, that view is something that we want to keep as Alaska Native people, as tribal people, as Indigenous people, as First Nations people. We don't want to give up our view that we belong to each other, that we are a people, and that we have a responsibility one to another. And I think giving into the justice systems demand uh, that we embrace uh, their justice system, which delivers no real justice and has no real good outcomes for our people. I think embracing that is causing a lot of problems. Of course, that brings up the question, well, what do we do with people who are deviant, with people who don't adapt to our specific way of dealing with our issues? What do we do with the Herberts of the world who sexually abuse our children? Hmm. And the answer is the same for people who abuse children sexually or physically or emotionally or psychologically, it's the same answer for anyone that abuses anybody else. And that's for us individuals to start to embrace the idea of personal responsibility for each other's community. That's to say that when we look at our communities, we start to take personal responsibility for it. In other words, look at our villages when I was little and growing up, and alcoholism was beginning to flourish there in our community, and alcoholism was not seen as a terrible thing. People drank, and to call somebody an alcoholic was, we talked about alcoholism the way we talk about sexual abuse today. Back then, you never, ever used the word alcoholism, alcoholic. Uh, you used the words partying, you used the words having fun. Uh, you called it everything but what it was, and you never talked about the outcomes of alcoholism. You never talked about hungry children. You never talked about abused children. You never talked about abused women. You never talked about abused men. You never talked about abuse during parties. Uh, you just never did it. And you didn't look at it. And what that means is that alcoholism flourished amongst our people, and it created a lot of problems. Uh, when we seen people abusing each other, uh, women abusing their men or abusing other women, uh, men abusing other men or abusing women, or people abusing their children, uh, we did not face it. We did not talk about it. We did not talk to new parents about how beating their spouses during parties were actually going to impact their children or their offspring or our culture. We never sat down and really had a discussion uh, about how this whole choice to allow violence into our families was going to impact us. We couldn't talk about it because, in order to talk about the violence, we would have had to talk about what was primarily causing that violence and family breakdown, and that was alcoholism. And without that, we had to embrace denial. Everybody in our culture had to embrace a lifestyle of denial, and that's denial of what's really going on. There were no children in my communities that were not impacted by ongoing alcoholism and violence. There was no one in my community that wasn't impacted by that. There was countless people, both men, women, and children, boys and girls, some cats and some dogs, and other things that were severely abused. There was violence across the spectrum. There was an explosion of childhood trauma, uh, watching parents commit violent acts against each other and against our friends, uh, violent acts, sexual, psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical acts of violence against each other. And none of us talked about it. None of us were able to, not a single one of us. And in that, as we as a people embraced silence in the face of alcoholism, uh, we were forcing on our people and on our kids, on me, a system of self denial, a system of denial of reality. We were forcing on our people a belief system where sharing our true selves, where children being able to grieve out the pain and suffering and talk about how they were being raised and demonstrate how parental behaviors was really impacting us. Family behaviors and family systems were impacting us as human beings. Uh, During parties, if a kid was hungry or afraid and started crying and showing his fear or her fear, uh, they were either ignored or told to shut up because the party must go on. Because for a parent to stop drinking and turn around and ask their child, "Why are you crying? What are you crying about?" That kid would most likely say something like I did when I was 12 and somebody told me, "Ray, you can't be down at the tribal hall dancing and drinking like adults. You're 12. Quit drinking." And I looked at the woman and said to her, "Well, uh, mom and dad have been drinking and the whole village has been drinking for weeks. Nobody is feeding me, and my uncle keeps coming over to my house and molesting me and my sister. So if you're going to tell me to quit drinking, why don't you tell my parents to quit drinking and tell my Uncle Mike to stop molesting me? If you ain't willing to say that to me, you ain't willing to do that, then why are you telling me to quit drinking? I'm going to be an alcoholic anyway." And that was an honest appraisal of a 12-year-old boy in the village. And that was an honest response to a 30-something-year-old woman showing concern for a 12-year-old boy with a bottle of whiskey and a whole lot of rage in his heart. And no parent could withstand that. What happened was that woman, she looked at me, she got tears in her eyes, she drank a shot of her beer, and she gave the rest to me and said, "You're right." I was 12. And that's a reality that we impose on each other. And that's a reality that was imposed on me. And I responded to it. Now, does that mean that I think 12-year-old native kids should drink? No, I don't think we should let 12-year-old kids drink. I think that woman was right to tell me not to drink. I think she was wise and she was kind, and it was one of the most loving things anybody has done for me as a child at that age, was to sit down and give me true and good and wise advice. But then to leave me there with no other solution. Because the truth is that when I drank, I was made human. I was made native. I was made fully native. Why? Because before I drank and before I was able to drink, before I got alcohol in my system, I was rightfully horrified of anyone drinking. There was gunshots going off in my village. There was acts of violence in my house. I watched people get knives pulled on them. I watched aunties get clubbed and knocked out. I watched people beat each other. I watched women cry. I heard suicides all around me. I seen my brother walking around so beaten I couldn't recognize him when I stared him in the face, looked at him, and I couldn't even recognize him. That's how beat up he was. When I went out, if people weren't trying to molest me, they were trying to beat me up. I hid in my house. I wish that my mom and dad didn't come home drinking, because if they did, the whole party moved up to the house. I was hungry, but nobody fed me. I was lonesome and nobody played with me. Those older kids that came around and played with me, they were 13, 14, they were drinking too. Now I was terrified all day, all the time. When everybody left the house and I picked up the half empty beer cans, the half drank water and Calvert's mixes, the sugar water and Calvert's, the sugar water and VO, the Olympia beer, when I picked those up and drank them, I lost my fear. I lost my shame. I lost my terror. And I understood what it meant to be a full-fledged native man. My gun made sense to me. I had courage. My fear had an outlet. When I started drinking the music down at the hall where everybody went to go dance and have fun and beat each other and stomp on my brother until I can't recognize him anymore, where there was blood in the dirt, where when I went down there during a big dance, 5, 6 people could jump up and stomp another man into the floor in front of everybody, 5 at a time, where hearing somebody crying like an animal as they're getting stomped, screaming and hollering, and then laying there motionless, unmoving, as full grown men swear and cuss and boot him in the face. Where that was happening, I was not afraid. I was a man. When you tried to pull that on me, I went home and I got a gun. And alcohol gave that to me. And only alcohol gave that to me. I needed that. I needed alcohol in my childhood. Without it, I could not be me, could not be human. And that was the cost of being a First Nations child in the village that raised me. And I look at today, after watching alcohol overrun my people, and our response be to look left and to look right and look up and look down and say, who is going to do anything about this? When is those Westerners going to send us good counselors that understand us? When are the Westerners going to send us VPSO programs for police to come and police us? When are the Westerners going to come and help us to not kill ourselves? When are the Westerners going to come and stop us from killing each other? And I grew up in that. I watched alcohol flood my village. I watched cocaine come across and hit my village like a ton of bricks. I lost so many older cousins and uncles to alcohol. And then I lost so many friends and cousins and relatives and brothers to cocaine, drinking, and other drugs. And I watched my people struggle against this. I watched alcoholism become a common word to my people in Fairbanks. I watched people in the village grow from being like my parents, who the word alcoholism was the same as the word child rapist today. Talking about our parents drank used to trigger people and cause problems. You never talked about your mom's drinking or your dad's drinking or your brother's drinking or your people's drinking ever. And I watched that inability to talk lock me and my counterparts into silence about the impacts of alcoholism. And I'm a byproduct of that. When I was 15 and I went to my family and said, our mom and dad are alcoholics. They were alcoholics. My oldest sister slapped me in the face 3 times for calling my parents alcoholics. First time just said, my parents, are alcoholics and mom is an alcoholic. And I got slapped. I was in counseling and foster care, and my older sister wasn't. She grew up in old school. And being a teenager, people around me, my age, 13, 14, we were able to see alcoholism for what it was, and the Western world was teaching us about alcoholism. And for our age group, it was normal to talk about it, to see it. We couldn't deny it because we grew up in it. Unlike my sisters, my older sisters, and my older siblings, I don't have a memory of my parents not being alcoholics. By the time I was born, they were in their midlife, and their alcoholism had caught them up. They were drinking before I was conceived. They were drinking when I was conceived. And when I was born, they were drinking too. And they continued to drink throughout my life. So while my parents were younger and having kids, my older siblings may have grew up with parents who were in the early stages of drinking and their alcoholism. And it was still fun and non-violent. And it was a way to blow off steam. But by the time I came along, it was a full-fledged raging alcoholics. With their drinking came violence, neglect, abuse, hunger, fear. By the time I was 10 years old, their drinking was so bad, they sold me for a half bottle of whiskey to one of my so-called uncles out of my tribe, out of my village that raised me. And that's my reality. So for me at 15, saying my parents were alcoholics was naming a whole system that nearly destroyed me, and it was a relief. To my older sibling, it was slapping my mom in the face. So she slapped me in the face and said, how dare you talk about my mom that way? And I said, well, they were drinking since I was a boy. And they drink too much and they spend too much money on it. Look. And I got slapped again, saying, what? Do you think I'm an alcoholic now? Do you think I'm an alcoholic because I drink? I drink as much as my parents do. Do you think I'm an alcoholic? To which I said, anyone that drinks like that is either an alcoholic or they're going to be. And I got slapped again and told, are you an alcoholic 'cause you drink? And I said, I must be, or I'm gonna be. Because apparently that's what natives do. And I got slapped again and told, now you don't even like natives. And this is no different than what we deal with nowadays with other forms of social problems: domestic violence, sexual abuse, neglect, child abuse, addiction and its outcomes on our children, violence against parents, violence between parents. I think one of my biggest fears of being silent, one of my biggest fears of not speaking about this and not bringing these things to light is that one day a man like me in his 50s will be sitting there looking back saying, when I was growing up, nobody responded to child abuse. Nobody responded to sexual abuse. No one responded to family neglect. Nobody responded to childhood trauma. Everybody looked at it as we're just getting by, we're just surviving, we're just getting through, we're just making it. We all have our own problems. We're all trying to get by, we're all trying to just survive. And while everybody was trying to survive, while everybody was trying to get through, while everybody was trying to just make do and be okay, while that was going on, sexual abuse and family violence and violence against children, violence against me, the little boy that I was, raged on. Perhaps sometime in the future there'll be a man sitting there like me saying, when I was a kid, the First Nations people did not even respond to my rape. That when I was 5, people were sexually abusing me. And back then, nobody would even tell them to stop. I was horrified and terrified every day of sexual violence, of physical violence. And when I was 12 and I was drinking and somebody said something to me, I shot them. And I became a violent person because that was the only way to keep myself safe. That was the only way for me to be a human. That was the only way for me to be a First Nations person and be a whole person. What will they say of me and of my generation? What will they say of my counterparts? And what will they be dealing with? I would never want to stand next to my Maker in heaven and look down and see my grandson or my great grandchildren living in a world that comes from silence in the face of such atrocities and blindness on the parts of our leaders to such basic concepts as the importance of raising children in a safe environment. A long time ago, people looked at me and seen a little boy who was adaptable and who could adapt to anything and was going to be okay. And they seen that what they were doing while damaging was not the end of the world because children are adaptable. Children are resilient. And that's true. Very true. If you raise a child in an alcoholic environment, they will adapt to it. If you raise a child in a violent environment, they will adapt to it. If you raise a child in a sexual environment, they will adapt to it. If you raise a child in an environment of personal accountability to their tribe, accountability to their people, they will adapt to that too. Alcoholic homes create people who adapted to alcoholic homes and who are built for alcoholic homes. And so they will have an alcoholic home. Some, like me, will reject those lies. Some, like me, will reject alcoholism. Some, like me, will reject the whole system of lies and self-denial and recover and stand up and be stronger. But in rejecting the lies and the teachings of my childhood, the teachings of denial and lying and self-flacating and self-destruction, by rejecting that, I reject those who taught me that. I have to. And anyone in my family that cannot adapt to the truth, which I had to adapt to in order to quit drinking, if they can't adapt to that, then I can't really be around them because they're going to continue to live out the lies that's destroying them and me and my people. At the end of the day, I question, am I a real First Nations person? Am I the child that my village raised? Did I turn out to be what my village raised me to be? I think we need to start seeing those ties and we need to start recognizing them for what they are. And we need to recognize what it means when we make those choices. And I think we need to start recognizing that we are making those choices today as First Nations people, as a group, when we deal with these issues. This is a long video. I'll roll into the next one pretty soon. God bless you. I hope this inspires you to change your perspective on needing to interact with our people in a different way. I hope I didn't trigger people, but if I did, I would say I only expose what's already there. God bless.